What does it mean to honor our mother and father? Now, this command has taken a hit for a number of reasons. We're going to get into those. But how seriously did God really mean honor your father and mother in the Old Testament when he gave this command to Moses? In Leviticus chapter 20, verse 9, we get a picture of this. For anyone who curses his father or his mother shall surely be put to death. He has cursed his father or his mother. His blood is on him. Children, youth, you're lucky. You don't live in that society. I'm lucky I didn't grow up in that society. It's serious business. A rebellious, dishonorable child was deserving of capital punishment in Israeli society. Now, why would God do that? Why would God make it such an important component of the way of life for the Hebrew people? Well, dishonor spreads. And if one child, when you look at how children interact with each other, if you've got a child who has good morals and good attributes, and you have a child that has bad morals and characteristics, who impacts who more? Does the good child pull the bad child up in most cases to live an honorable life? No. The negative influence pulls down the good. In fact, Paul says, bad company corrupts good character in the New Testament. In order to preserve and to save society and the family itself, God made this a very serious deal. Do you see the importance that God places on this command? Now, we might not understand it yet, but do you see the centrality of this idea of honoring your mother and father? Well, I want to take us through 3 points that we need to address as it relates to this here this morning. The first point is, what does it mean to honor? The word honor comes from the Hebrew word kaved. Everybody say kaved. Kaved. And it means heavy or weighty. It is the word that the Old Testament uses for the glory of God, for the weightiness of his divine majesty. One commentator I read defines honor as respect, esteem, value, in the case of our fathers and mothers, as a gift from God. Nothing pertaining to what they do, but because of their position as our parent, to give them this thing called honor. Well, what does honor mean? Well, rather, what does it not mean? It doesn't mean obey your parents if what they told you to do defies the commands of God. You can still honor someone when you disagree with them. Honor does not mean to enable someone to do something that is harmful or to allow yourself to be manipulated by them. Those of you who feel manipulated by your parents in order to honor them, you're not necessarily honoring them if they're manipulating to do something you really don't want to do and don't feel good about doing. So that's not honor. In many ways, that can be dishonor. And this principle is especially important with our parents because how we relate to our parents as we become adults is, one, so important, and two, so complicated. When the child no longer has to obey the parent and yet honor is still expected. This is a difficult place to be. It's a difficult relationship to maneuver. It's like being married. Since I've married Julie, who I am with Julie is the best indicator of what's going on in my heart because Julie knows me best. Julie relates to me best. For me to be loving and thoughtful and attentive to other people, but to neglect my wife would be hypocrisy. The thoughtfulness and the care that you would see would not be true. It wouldn't be what was really there because I was incapable of showing that same virtue towards the closest relationship in my life. Same can be said of our parents. You cannot be hostile towards, you cannot be antagonistic towards, you cannot hold bitterness toward your parents and turn around and say to people who are less close to you, who know you less, who you have less familiarity with, and love them and have sustained good relationships with them and think that, well, I'm a loving person generally, except for this really difficult with my relationship with my parents. It's not possible. We can deceive ourselves to think so, but the scriptures tell us time and again, salt and fresh water cannot flow from the same spring. How many of you struggle, and I'll take a show of hands, how many of you struggle to show the balance of honor towards your parents? Anybody out there fall into that? Especially as they get older and as you get older? Yes. Some of you are thinking about your parental relationships right now. Herndons, you guys looking at each other? Okay, Herndons, close your eyes. Everybody, let's raise hands again. It's always unfair for Matt when I ask a parent, we do a parent question, because they're right there checking on him, making sure he gives the right answer. But this is a crucial question for us to ask. And it leads into our second question. When we understand what honor is and what honor is not, then we hear this command. When I first read this command, what was the first thing my mind went towards? Are my children honoring me? Right? For those of us that have children, our first instinct is, am I being honored by my children? That is right where we go. But when Moses walked off the mountain with the commandments, he wasn't, okay, for all the adults, I've got 9 commands for you here, and children, come over here. This number 5, this is just for you. No. Commandment number 5, and first and foremost, it's for you and for me. Adults, for the most part, growing older, having our own families. Our parents are still alive. They're still around. And God says, honor your father and your mother, that it may go well with you, that you may live long in the land. And so the second point that we need to talk about is answering the question, are you honoring your parents? When given this command, there's no more direct application than considering the very question, are you honoring your parents? In Exodus 20:12, honor your father and mother, that your days may be long in the land that the Lord is giving you. The verse does not say, honor your father and mother until you are old enough to live on your own and don't really need them anymore. It's not at all what it says. It says, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right, which has a time limit to it. Because at some point we become an adult, we don't have to obey our parents. But honor is never surrendered, and it is never abandoned. And we must always be trying to understand what it means to honor the second most important relationship we have if we're married, and if not, maybe the first most important relationship that we have, that with our parents. This week, as I was working on this sermon, surprisingly, I thought often of my own mother. Now, we've not lived near my mom for almost 10 years. We moved away from Detroit to Grand Rapids, about 200 miles away, about 9 months after we were married, Julie and I, before we had any children. And then 2.5 years ago, we moved here, about 550 miles away. And my mom was widowed in 1993, and my dad passed away. I was 19. He was 51. And at that time, even though I was in the Marines, I was very involved in my mother's life. I took very seriously the command to care for my mom in my dad's absence as a widow, wanting to care for her needs, provide for her, help her, even though I was 5,000 miles away, stationed overseas. I came home, I got married, we moved away, we had some children, kept having children, had another child thereafter. Yes, I could keep going. And now, as I'm sitting there this week, I had to ask the question, Jeremy, are you honoring your mom? And to be honest with you, I couldn't say that I was. I felt this tension in my gut. What does it mean to honor Jeremy? You don't get mad at her. You don't argue with her. But have you kind of dismissed your mom in the years as she's gotten older as a widow? Do you not think of her as much? With your own family, have you become kind of focused on them and just let your older sister, Heather, she lives near mom, take the majority of the care for her? These are questions that you and I all ask as we get older, and we will ask all the more as our parents depend more and more on us. Do you feel the inner tension of knowing the need to honor them, but not being sure how to do so? This is especially relevant for those of you who have parents who are not honorable people, who do not honor you, who are dismissive, who are angry, who are absent. How in the world are we supposed to honor somebody who is not worthy, in part or in full, of receiving the honor that we are commanded to give? Well, you know what? That's one of the great things about honor. Honor is not a reciprocated relationship. It's not a reciprocated thing that we give. You can esteem somebody and not even know them. You can esteem somebody even though they don't esteem you. It's like love. You don't have to be loved by somebody to show love to them. And honor is one of those things that we must do. It's also important to remember that regardless of what happened, for those of you that are with either adoptive or biological parents and still have them in your lives, that as your parents nurtured you when you were an infant and a young child and were dependent on their presence in order to survive, they will need you as they age, and they need someone to love and care for them in their final years. We don't live in a vacuum. You're not simply living for yourself and those of you that have children, raising your own children. Someday you're going to be old, and your children will have a value, of virtue, in regards to what does it mean to honor mother and father. That will be very relevant to your life. Now, you may have a lot of money, and I'll tell you a little story where money in no way, when considering retirement, meets the needs that we have in our hearts. Because we don't have any elderly relatives nearby, Julie and I didn't want to have this part of society, family life omitted from our own lives. And so earlier this year, we set up an appointment to visit Laclede Grove's retirement home once a month on a Saturday morning. It's right on Laclede Station, right at the bottom of the hill before you go up. It's a beautiful complex. And since about February or March, every month on the first Saturday, we've been visiting as a family. Around 10:30, we show up and we stay until lunchtime. We don't have any relatives there. We didn't know anybody at all when we got going. We had to go through a security check beforehand. But every month, the Zilkes are there trying to love on these people. There's a number of stories. But one of the most heartbreaking stories is Rosemary. Rosemary had 9 children, and she swears she raised them well. Rosemary and I have conversations. She's coherent. In her age, she's lost a little bit of her cognitive abilities, but she can talk, she can engage, she can speak about memories. There's no serious deterioration of her mind. And from what she says, it's been 2 years. She's now in her late 80s. She has children in their 50s and 60s who have their own families. And she hasn't seen one of her children in 2 years. The money's there, they're paying the home, they're caring for her, they're feeding her. They let her wheel herself around the room in her chair, let her watch TV, put her to bed at night, let her go through the same thing in the morning. I don't think Rosemary had this in mind when she was birthing and raising 9 children, that none of them would be there for her.